I was in my early doctoral studies when my eye caught the enticing title of an article, Valley of Beautiful Widows. Beautiful widows. But behind this title was the grim, frightful fact that young men died in their 30s and 40s from heart disease. Karelia, Finland, the highest rate of heart disease in the world. But these women wanted to do something about it. And so they approached a young scientist, a young epidemiologist by the name of Pekka Puska. And they said, Dr. Puska, can you help us? Now, it so happened that Dr. Puska had just seen an article by Lester Breslow. It so happened that this was a time when Dr. Lester Breslow had just released the initial findings of his Alameda County study in California. Here's what he did. Dr. Breslow was a top-notch public health specialist whose findings began to rock the public health world. He had examined 7,000 people in the Alameda County area in California, and he had followed them over 20 years. And here's what he found. He found that his study provided mathematical proof that people can live longer and healthier by changing their habits. He used quantitative analysis to prove that a 45-year-old man that would practice at least 6 or 7 health habits could live 11.5 years longer than a person who only practiced 3 or fewer of those. So the question is, what were these 7 health habits that became predictive of the life expectancy of a person? And here you see some of these factors. 7 health habits indisputably affected longevity. These were the factors: don't smoke, get adequate sleep, exercise regularly, drink only in moderation alcohol, daily breakfast, maintain proper weight, and regular meals, no snacking. Amazing. Simple health habits, if you practice 6 or 7, they translated into 11.5 extra years. And then furthermore, they found that if you took people that practiced all 7 and compared them with people who didn't practice any of them, the health status was actually 30 years younger. It was a clarion call for public health that the issue today had to focus on health habits when it comes to understanding chronic diseases. Inspired by these findings, Dr. Puska began to make time for doing something for these beautiful women in the Karelia province of Finland. And at the end of the program, I'll tell you what happened over the next 30 years. Amazing effects. But let's go back to some other studies. The Norfolk study done by Cambridge University. Here they followed some 20,000 adults without any known cardiovascular disease or cancer, and they followed them for 11 years. And during those 11 years, 2,000 deaths occurred, and they began to then correlate certain health habits that they had studied of these people, and they found that 4 factors in particular correlated very well with mortality risk. And they found that smoking, alcohol consumption, exercise, and fruits and vegetable consumption were directly related to a 4-fold mortality risk. This is to say that if you were a smoker, you used alcohol in excess, you didn't exercise, you didn't have enough fruits and vegetables, your risk was 4 times higher in dying during those 11 years when compared to people who did not smoke, didn't use alcohol to excess, exercised, and had plenty of fruits and vegetables. And again, this translated into a difference in longevity of 14 years. The point is, you can shape your own future. What was interesting in these 3 major studies is the fact that many of the health habits related to fork and knife. How do you use fork and knife? Could it be that fork and knife could be weapons of mass destruction? On the other hand, could it be that you could turn fork and knife into instruments of hope and health and healing? Let's take a look at the role of diet in the etiology of circulation-related diseases, our most common diseases today. Here you see in North America, 30% of all deaths are due to cardiovascular disease, followed by cancer and diabetes. But you know, it wasn't always that way. Heart disease, yes, We think it's a normal way to go, but 100 years ago, it was very, very rare. Here's an article in 1928 by Dr. William Osler. He said, you can expect 1 heart attack a year. This is 1928. You can expect 1 heart attack a year in an average hospital in an average-sized town. 1 heart attack a year. Now things have changed. Today, we have 4,000 heart attacks a day in this country, with cardiovascular disease being responsible for every 3rd death. And look at cancer rates. Breast cancer, for instance, 1960, 1 in 20 women. Today, it's 1 in 7 women. And then you look at diabetes. It used to be a fairly rare disease. Today, we have seen a 300% increase in diabetes just in the last 30 years. This is not a genetic disease. I mean, genetics take about 300 years to change in a society. This is happening in 30 years. There must be other factors involved here. And then when you begin to look at chronic disease in general, you begin to realize that no matter what the age that you look at, the chronic disease have gone up in every age level. This is not just an increase in chronic disease because we're living longer. That is oftentimes the argument used. No, take a look. Here, even in the 45 to 64, there has been an increase of 50% in the prevalence of chronic diseases. So something is happening. And look at what happened to the American chairs. You know, the size actually began to change. The seats used to be about 17 inches, 17 inches, 17 inches for 70, 80 years, and suddenly, bingo, 24 inches. What happened? Did they just need to use up surplus lumber in the Northwest? No, we have become larger. And with the increase in obesity, you also see an increase in diabetes, 7 times more common now. High blood pressure, 6 times more common in obese people. 5 times more heart disease, diarthritis, asthma, sleep apnea, and cancers. Obesity seems to become a marker of the diet of a culture. And with obesity itself, it might actually increase the likelihood of these diseases. And when you think about it, this all happened sort of in the last 30, 40 years. What happened 30, 40 years ago? Well, do you remember, some of you? There was an increase in the prevalence of fast food restaurants. Fast foods emerged in the 1970s, and they spread like wildfire in our society. Here you see fast food in 1972, $3 billion, and today it's probably more like $200 billion. And you know, today we consider French fries to be the most eaten vegetable. Come on, this is not a vegetable, this is fat. And so when you look at the diet composition, you begin to realize some unusual findings here. This is a very important slide. It looks at the diet composition of a cultural diet. This is perhaps the diet of a country where you don't have these chronic diseases to any extent. In these countries you eat potatoes, you eat corn, you eat beans, something like they used to eat in Mexico. But you know, that farmer in Mexico now, he wants to send money home. He wants to develop a future for his family. And so he says to his wife, I'm going to the big city. He does. And he sends the money home. But he also, as he's training now to become a programmer, he's also changing the diet because he's going to eat with the big boys now. No more potatoes, potato chips. No more corn, corn chips. No more beans, now it's burgers. And everything changes. He used to drink water, now it's soda pop. He used to eat at home, now he's eating out. And we see now a change from slow foods to fast foods. And the man that used to be lean now begins to bulge and becomes large. And whenever you have this kind of a transformation in the diet, when you have these processed foods, you actually add a lot of fat, and the fat consumption increases. You add a lot of sugar, the sugar consumption increases. You eat much more animal products, the protein consumption increases. And what happens to the nutritionally laden and wholesome complex carbohydrates with all the fiber and all the nutrient value becomes reduced to a small amount, and whatever starch we eat now is refined white flour starch. Hardly a nutritiously laden food. And so whenever you have this kind of a food composition, you will always find within 5 years, 10 years at best, the onset of chronic diseases in a society that used to be a virgin country when it comes to these diseases. And so Dr. Willett from Harvard said it very, very well. He said, the transition from food to becoming an industrialized product has become a foundational problem. The actual processing of food has stripped it of its nutrition, converting grains into refined starches and concentrated sugars and fats with adverse effects on our health. We change our diet, it's at our own peril. Now let me take a closer look now. Let's go a little deeper. Here you see the change in the sugar consumption in the United States. We used to have 2 teaspoons a day. Today, would you have believed it? It's 30 teaspoons of sugar per person per day. And of course, most of the sugar comes in the form of soda drinks. Do you realize that one small can of soda pop usually has about 150 calories, and we can easily consume 2, 3, 4 on a hot day? So this is where a lot of sugar comes in, but there are some other products too. I always tell people, be sure you analyze that, doing that very, very carefully. Look at it like an anatomist would do, and always select the whole. And people say, well, you can buy those too. They also have calories. I didn't realize that. A German chocolate cake piece, 15 teaspoons. There's even a banana split. And you know, this is what we sell as cereal to kids. I mean, this is almost 50% sugar. And then when it comes to the fat consumption, we have now moved towards more and more processed fats. Do you realize that it takes 14 ears of corn to produce 1 tablespoon of corn oil? How easy it is to take in 1 tablespoon of corn oil, how difficult it would be to take 1 tablespoon of corn oil in the form of the original corn as it comes to us in nature in 14 years. You see, food producing and food processing concentrates the calories, and it makes it much easier to take more of these foods into our system. For instance, when you have some of these potato chips, this is just 6-7 ounces. That's 1,000 calories. You could have eaten 10 potatoes. And yet people say to me, I can eat potatoes. Potatoes are fattening. It's not the potato. It's what you do with it. Or, you take one of these, what do you call these milkshakes? Yeah, that's a large one, granted. But there you have 2,000 calories. I mean, a woman doesn't eat more than 1,500-1,600 calories for the whole day. This is just a snack. When I ask her, she comes to me, she wants to have some help with regard to her overweight. She forgets the snacks. We don't count snacks. And yet 40% of the calories we eat today comes in the form of snacks. I always tell people, be careful with snacks. The larger the snacks, the bigger the slacks. It happens all the time. Our snacks are not carrot sticks or celery sticks. No, our snacks are really high-calorie, dense foods where you combine fats and sugar. And so it shouldn't be any big surprise to us when you realize that 16% of our calories that we consume comes from sugar, about 24% comes from fats, oils, and grease, and 4% with men from alcohol, so that we have about almost 50% of our food consumption. 50% of our calories comes from non-nutritious sources. This is what we sometimes call nutritionally poor foods, junk foods. It is no wonder that it's very easy in America to become overweight and to grow in size. But there's a second shift in the food revolution, and this time it's involving animal products. Here you see in 1910, we consumed about 124 pounds in meat. Today it's 201 pounds. With this, we consume more and more fats. Take a look at this picture. Did you realize that the average meat eater consumes 12 cows? I mean, 12 cows. I mean, from the snout to the tail. 12 cows in a lifetime, plus 25 hogs, plus 2,400 chickens, and then people wonder why their cholesterol is high. They wonder why they have weight gain. Take a look at this one here. People always have the idea that when you eat meat, you get good protein and plenty of protein. I mean, if you don't have meat, you're going to be in trouble. You'll be protein deficient. No, not really. Take a look. This is not processed meat. Just look at it. salami is 73%, a lunch meat is 80%, and when you have this American hot dog, that's 85% fat. And you really don't want to know what the other 15% is made from. And then you look at meat in general, again, you look at sirloin steak, people think, well, I had a good protein dish. Well, wait a minute. This is 75% of all the calories is fat in that sirloin steak. When you have spare ribs, that's 80% fat. Folks, from now on, when you think of meat, don't think protein. Think fat. What about dairy foods? Well, you know, there are some that are fairly reasonable when it comes to fat content, like skim milk. But then you have whole milk, that's about 50% of the calories is fat. You thought it was 3%, didn't you? Yeah. Of all the calories in a glass of milk, 48% would come from fat. And then you look at cheese, 70%, and cream cheese, sorry to tell you, 91% fat. I mean, you might as well use Vaseline. I mean, that's 100%. And so you see the dramatic increase in the cheese consumption in our society, especially in the 1970s. What happened in 1970? Well, we began to shift from whole milk to skim milk. What do you think the industry did with all the fat it scooped off? They put it into cheese. So people now, very self-righteously, they ask for skim milk because they're health conscious, and then they ask for a cheeseburger. It just doesn't add up, does it? And so you see cheese today is everywhere. As a matter of fact, in the American diet, the number one source of saturated fat, which is the driver of cholesterol, in that the liver responds to saturated fat to produce excessive cholesterol. The number one driver of cholesterol produced by the body is saturated fat coming from cheese. Of course, the other sources are also there, meats of all kinds. These are mostly animal-based fats that account for most of the saturated fat. And so this is in the American diet. 51% of all the calories comes from processed food. This is refined, engineered food made for profit. You have 26 plus 9, 35% of all the calories comes from animal products. You have to worry about saturated fat, you have to worry about cholesterol, you have to worry about not enough fiber in the diet. And please note, only 14% of all the calories we eat in America today will come from fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. These are the kind of foods we should really zero in on. Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes, and perhaps a few nuts. This is where the nutrition is. This is where the fiber is. This is where health is. This is where you have a plethora of powerful, positive effects taking place. And so Tommy Thompson, who was then the Secretary of U.S. Health and Human Services, he said, our nation's largest killer diseases are largely lifestyle related, and they can therefore be prevented or delayed. They are not prevented by vaccines or cured by pills and procedures. They are largely an extension of our health-damaging behaviors, our use of tobacco, lack of exercise, and our rich diet. Our rich diet. Well, I think we have known this for a long time. Here's Dr. Willett from Harvard, and he said, we have always known this. Epidemiologists have shown that the major determinants of our killer diseases today are dietary and lifestyle factors. We have known this, we've heard it, but we don't do it because it's so easy to get distracted and seduced and addicted to these foods that are coming to us so readily available. Okay, let's take a closer look at the common killer diseases that are largely circulation related. Here you see the typical heart. It's about the size of a fist. What's really important are these three major coronary arteries. And when we talk about heart disease, we really talk about coronary artery disease, where the arteries become narrowed down. This is the cross-section of a coronary artery. And here you see this belongs to a 45-year-old truck driver. High cholesterol numbers, lots of atherosclerosis, this plaque buildup here. And so the lumen is reduced from 100% down to more like 35%. All you need now is a blood clot, and it seals this opening, and blood and oxygen can no longer flow to the heart muscle, and the heart muscle begins to die. That's a myocardial infarction. Let me show you a film clip that will illustrate this.
Heart attacks, certain cancers, osteoporosis, diabetes. The major diseases of our society may be caused in part by what we eat.
I first woke up, so to speak, when I was working on the anesthesia service, learning how to put people to sleep. And I was seeing my patients for the next day's surgery for coronary artery bypass surgery in order to bypass clogged arteries in their heart. Because it was late at night, I drew the man's blood test, and when I took the blood to the laboratory and had it processed, I couldn't believe my eyes. Now, normally, this liquid layer floating on top of the blood clot is quite transparent. It's a yellow, but quite clear. You can see right through it. The blood in this patient's tube, however, was anything but clear. The serum floating on his clot was thick and greasy white. It looked like glue. In fact, it stuck to the sides of the blood tube when I shook the tube. I went back to the patient. I said, Mr. Phillips, did you eat before you came to the hospital tonight? He said, yes. I said, what did you have? He said, I had a cheeseburger and a milkshake. And when he said that, I realized that what I was looking at in his tube was all the fat in the beef burger, all the butter fat in the cheese, and the butter fat in the ice cream and in the milkshake. And all this fat had oozed out into his blood and actually turned his blood fatty. Well, 30, 40, 50 years of keeping your blood very fatty creates changes in the blood vessels that are very dangerous.
Over the years, arteries can become clogged with fatty material. Then a blood clot can form, blocking the blood flow completely. If the artery leads to the heart, the lack of oxygen can cause heart muscle to die. That's a heart attack. If the clogged artery leads to the brain, the patient has a stroke.
The next morning, we took Mr. Phillips to the operating room, and I put him to sleep, and the surgeon opened up his chest. And from these arteries, he began pulling out yellow, greasy deposits of fatty material called atherosclerosis.
You just saw America's #1 pathology that is responsible for much of our chronic disease because it relates to our circulatory system. Did you know that you have about 60,000 miles of blood vessels in your body, one body? And the larger arteries become affected by this disease process called atherosclerosis. You see, you're born with clean arteries. By the time you're 20 years of age, you have 20% narrowing. By the time you're 45 years of age, you have 56% narrowing. By the time you're 70 years of age, you're just barely hanging on. And the first time you actually find that you have a disease process going on is when you're about 70–80% narrowing. It comes late in the game. And so in many, many ways, this is something that you have to handle now. You cannot wait and say, well, let me just have a little bit of chest pain, and then I know I develop heart disease, then I make some changes. Too late. Because for 40% of the people, the first sign of heart disease, the first sign of artery disease, the first sign of coronary disease, the first sign is sudden death. The time is now. You see here, it's not only that you have these coronary arteries to worry about, but you have to also be concerned about the cerebral arteries, the carotid arteries, the renal arteries, the femoral arteries, and with that come many, many different diseases, powerful diseases. And yet you have never put it together that they're all interrelated, because for every disease, you have a separate medical specialist. And everybody gives you the very special and the very best medication for that particular organ that is affected. Not again putting it together for you that this is one basic disease. It's called atherosclerosis that expresses itself in different ways. It's many diseases, many sites, many names, but one pathology and one etiology. That is to say, there's one basic reason for these diseases. And some of that has to do prominently with a fork and knife. We'll come into that right now. This is coming from the famous Framingham study. They followed people for many, many, many years. They started in 1946. The study is still going on, and it has yielded hundreds and hundreds of scientific papers, thousands of papers. And they found that these are the drivers of atherosclerosis. These are drivers of coronary artery disease. From the top all the way down, the highest risk factor is cholesterol, smoking, and high blood pressure, these three. And then you add diabetes, obesity, triglycerides, and on the other hand, you have a lack of exercise and stress, and maybe some genetics. So these are the big factors. Just to give you some idea how powerful they are in driving this disease, just let's assume you have a very, very high cholesterol, you have high blood pressure, you're a smoker, you're diabetic, you didn't pass a treadmill test, you're 35 years of age, you're male. With this profile, the chance of a heart attack is 14% in the next 6 years. Now, on the other hand, if you were going to lower your cholesterol to the 150, which is ideal, to an ideal blood pressure, you don't smoke anymore, you do something about your diabetes, and now you have a risk that has been 140 times reduced. That is to say, when you look at this red background number system here versus the green, the positive, the risk of dying of a heart attack in 6 years is 140 times higher with this risk profile when compared to a more ideal risk profile. And we can do something about these risk profiles. We can shift from red to green. We do it in the CHIP program all the time. And it happens very, very rapidly, as a matter of fact. Within 3-4 weeks, you can bring your cholesterol down by 25%. You can bring your blood sugars down. You can do something about your high blood pressure. It's an amazing change. The body is always interested in healing itself. The body is amazing. The body always defaults back to normal, to ideal. But folks, you cannot run a Ferrari with putting diesel fuel in it. You gotta put the right raw materials into that body. When you do, the body begins to heal itself. The body is in that position, preferring to become healthy over and over again. And so when you look at this risk arch a little bit more closely, you begin to realize that almost all of these risk factors are related to our lips. Cholesterol is 80% related to our lips, to what we eat, especially the saturated fat and the trans fats in processed foods. They drive the cholesterol that's being made by the liver. Smoking has to do with the lips, yeah. Diabetes, largely related to diet. Obesity, no question. Triglycerides, again, diet. And then you have high blood pressure, a high salt diet. These are largely risk factors that are driven by fork and knife. So we need to really focus there. So let's take a closer look at the cholesterol. These are some huge studies that enrolled some 350,000 people. And they found that those who had cholesterol levels of 150 in the study versus those who had something like 300, the difference in coronary deaths was 5 times higher. So cholesterol is the driver of this epidemic of circulation-related diseases. And if you don't want to rely exclusively on these large, powerful observational studies, then you can go to the animal experimental world. And there you can take some monkeys, you feed them a typical diet, and you add some extra egg yolks, lots of cholesterol there, and some corn oil or any kind of fat that you have, and bingo, in 19 months, some of these baboons will have died of massive heart attacks, and they look pretty much like the heart attack of humans. Here's Dr. William Connor, who was working on this field for many, many years. He said, if ever a human disease can be produced in animals, it is atherosclerosis. It is heart disease. It's coronary artery disease. All we have to do is feed animals just like we feed humans, and the disease is there. I want to take you to Loma Linda University. As you know, this is where I make my home. This is the medical center there. This is the center of a large population study called the Adventist Health Study. The government has spent some $25 million to elucidate why is it that Adventists belong to these 5 blue zones of the longest living people in the world. The Adventist people are a fairly conservative group of denomination, religious organization, and they just about have 20 million people around the world, and they have about 1 million Adventist members here in North America. And this group has a very similar lifestyle. They're very homogeneous in their exercise. They don't use alcohol usually. They don't smoke. They usually go to church 1 day a week, fairly regularly. That's part of their DNA. But they have something where they're different, within themselves, because some of these Adventists are vegetarians and some of these people are lacto-ovo-vegetarians. That means they don't eat meat, but they eat dairy and eggs. And then some of the Adventists are meat eaters. And so the government provided $25 million to study the Adventists and ask, help us to understand, is there a difference in health outcomes among the people, the Adventist people, according to their dietary lifestyles? And here's the results. They checked out Adventists that were lacto-vegetarians, and they compared them with Adventists that were meat eaters. And please note, when it comes to high blood pressure, the lacto-ovo-vegetarians only had about half the amount of hypertension, about 2/3 the amount of arthritis, about 2/3 the amount of prostate cancer, and about 55% of the colon cancer. So these are big differences. And so this then gave rise to another even larger study where they enrolled now 100,000 people in North America, and they have very carefully identified exactly what these people eat. Some of these people are actually vegans. That means they don't have any animal products, and that's about 9%. Lacto-vegetarians, about 31%. Pesco, these are fish-eating vegetarian Adventists, 10%. And then you have about 50% of the Adventists are meat eaters. Maybe not as much as the general population, but they are meat eaters. And the question then is, would these different dietary subgroups translate into different disease risks? After all, they're all non-smokers. They're all basically not using alcohol, or at least they're not supposed to. They basically have similar exercise patterns. They have similar stress patterns. They go to church once a week usually. It's part of the DNA. And you notice here who is doing best. Here you see the average weight of the different dietary subgroups. The Adventist women, meat-eating women, weigh on the average 180 pounds, and then you go down the list to the vegans, which weigh about 40 pounds less. The same trend is found in men, which only strengthens the finding, and there you have a difference between meat-eating men versus vegan men of about 32 pounds. So if you would come to me and you ask me, I'd like to lose some weight, what is a good way to do this? What would I recommend? Well, move towards the green color, wouldn't you? And then you can do the same thing for diabetes. Here again you see diabetics. The difference between meat-eating Adventist and vegetarian, pure vegetarian Adventist is 6.3 versus 1.6. That's a 4-fold differential. And you can do the same thing for high blood pressure. The difference there is 4 times again. And then you go to cholesterol, as you would have perhaps guessed, the Adventist meat eaters have 5 times more, 15 versus 3%. They have 5 times more the cholesterol levels that are subject to treatment. And so we begin to realize that fork and knife are very powerful tools. As a matter of fact, I think these are weapons of mass destruction. Here's an article in Time magazine. It says, experts estimate that up to 80% of chronic disease and premature death in the United States could be prevented by making significant changes in diet and lifestyle. How do you use your fork and knife? Dr. Dennis Burkett, an English physician, was honored in 1993 with what we call the American Nobel Prize of Sort. He did some excellent work in Africa where he spent 20 years and made discoveries about the importance of fiber in the diet. He also found a cure for a special cancer, which is now called the Burkitt lymphoma. And in addressing some 600 physicians honoring him on this 2-day special seminar, he said, the greatest medical discovery of the last 20 years, this is 1993, last 20 years, he said, the last 20 years was the understanding that our Western disease, our modern killer disease, our chronic diseases are largely lifestyle related. And therefore, they must be preventable and potentially reversible. Do you remember I talked about the Valley of Beautiful Widows? Remember the call for help to Dr. Puska? And he had just seen the study by Dr. Lester Breslow. Yeah, he went to work, and not without some opposition from traditional health practitioners, He said, we need to reduce the saturated fat intake in the Finnish diet. We need to do something about the high salt intake in the diet here. We need to introduce more fruits and vegetables. We need to cut back on animal products. We need to do something about the salt content. We need to do something about smoking. These were the kind of health habits that he now began to instill in the people of Karelia. And they responded. Here you see the mortality rates from heart disease reduced by 73%. That's all they did. Some simple lifestyle changes and heart disease almost drops out. 73% is gone. Lung cancer, of course, also came down because they stopped smoking. And all of cardiovascular disease dropped by 68%. That's coronary disease and all the other diseases that we talked about. Circulation-related diseases, chronic diseases dropping by 68%. Powerful. And you say, well, that's nice, but they probably died of something else now, right? Well, maybe, but let's take a look at this. Here you see the results of the Karelia project over 25 years. The men no longer died at 64.8 on average, but now they were living 72.5 years. I mean, this is enormous. I mean, this is an 8-year increase in life expectancy for all the men in Finland, because the project went from Karelia to Finland, where it was adopted by the government. Women, they too increased their life expectancy by about 6 years. So there's nothing we can do in medicine that would give us these kind of returns on our investment. I mean, 8 years for men, 6 years for women. This is a glorious data. And of course, Dr. Puskaleta was the top man at the World Health Organization. He's also an acquaintance of mine, a very much revered person that has inspired many of us. And so maybe it is time to change the diet. Maybe we need to use the fork and knife differently. Maybe we need a new cow. This kind of a cow. Because maybe that holds the cure in that it offers a more optimal diet. The optimal diet then should focus on a wide variety of plant-based whole foods, and you can eat them as much as you want. You don't have to restrict yourself. Aim for simple food preparation. Don't use too much fats and oils and sugar and salt. And also try to avoid refined, processed, engineered foods. This is how you want to use your fork and knife. Foods of color, foods as grown, plenty of water, and a peaceful mind. And you say to yourself, well, I don't know that I can do this. This is too much of an extreme makeover. I like to start and maybe do it progressively. That's a great way to go. Some people do it cold turkey. Yeah, cold turkey. Others do it gradually. You make the choice. Here's your goal. If you're on the left side, and this is what you eat, meat, dairy, eggs, processed foods, alcohol, and caffeine, you can expect the worst health outcome. On the other hand, as you begin to move more and more and more progressively towards the other side, and now you begin to focus on eating more fruits and vegetables, some nuts and seeds, and plenty of whole grains, legumes, the beans, and water, you're moving towards optimal health. That's what you want to do. Allow me to make a personal appeal. Do you want to be healthier and live longer? Do you want to save 35 to 40% on your food bill? Do you want to leave a softer footprint on the environment? Do you want to be kinder to animals? Do you want to save the planet? Create a future for your children and grandchildren? Then let us vote with our forks and knives. Let us use our fork and knife more effectively. Let us move more towards a plant-based diet. Let us move more towards whole foods. Avoid the refined, the engineered foods, the soft drinks and the crinkly bags. Now, based on the overwhelming scientific evidence, let us all move towards a plant-based, whole food diet, because it can make all the difference. And to me at least, it seems also the only responsible and sane choice. You want to know a little bit more about the optimal diet? You want to move from the good life to the best life? All you have to do is click on chiphealth.com/PlantPure. We love to help you. how you use your fork and knife can make all the difference.
What will your last 10 years look like? Will you be quick enough for a game of tag with your grandchild? Strong enough to embrace every moment? Will you grow old with vitality? Or get old with disease? It's time to decide. The average Canadian will spend their last 10 years in sickness. Change your future at makehealthlast.ca.
In my last presentation, I talked to you about fork and knife as it can become a weapon of mass destruction. We talked about circulation-related chronic diseases like heart disease. We talked about atherosclerosis and the progressive narrowing of the circulatory system. We talked about how it expresses itself in different portions of the body with different diseases, but actually we said these are many diseases, many sites in different locations, many names, but it's really one pathology and it's one etiology, one kind of cause. It has to do with how we make our choices. And we talked about the risk arch for atherosclerosis and circulation-related diseases. We talked about the primacy, the prominent role that diet plays in affecting cholesterol, diabetes, obesity, triglycerides, and high blood pressure. And by using our fork and knife differently, we are suggesting that we can actually turn these tools into instruments of health and healing. And that's pretty exciting. But actually, some of the researchers have made some interesting comments. For instance, Dr. William Roberts, the editor of the American Journal of Cardiology, he said even as far back as 1989, he said there are not 9 risk factors for cardiovascular disease, as I showed you on the arch there, but there's really only one, and that is a lifetime presence of blood cholesterol levels above 150. And then here is Dr. Antonio Gatto, the president of the American Heart Association, who spoke before the Senate and said, in societies with blood cholesterol levels below 160, there's virtually no heart disease or atherosclerosis. So it seems that whenever you have a cholesterol number above 160, you're creating an environment that has been created by the lifestyle, the diet that caused the cholesterol to go up, that also then creates the other factors in its train. And then here's Dr. Bill Connors, who worked for years in the area of animal experimentation. He said, if ever a human disease can be produced in animals, it is atherosclerosis. And if ever the requirements for this disease have been isolated, they are cholesterol and fats in the diet, and especially the saturated fats prominently found in animal products and the trans fats prominently found in processed foods. And here's the American diet. I mean, this is a typical food consumption pattern that you find in the United States. You know, these are the kind of foods that are largely processed foods. These are foods that are high in fat and grease. They're high in cholesterol, they're high in salt and sugar, and they're usually devoid of foods as grown, foods that come to us as they come to us in nature. We said that only 14% of all the calories that we eat are coming from fruits and vegetables, whole grains and legumes. And we would be much, much better off if we could highlight these foods and use dairy and animal products, if you want to use them at all, at a minimal level, and similar, of course, use less refined, engineered, processed foods. So here's Dr. Walter Willett once more. He said, epidemiologists have long known that the major determinants of our killer diseases are dietary and lifestyle forces. And so I want to now add to the previous lecture one that is much more hopeful and that can provide healing and health and hope. And I want to designate fork and knife as instruments of health and healing. So here's the question. What would happen to people who already have disease? They have already existing chronic circulatory-related diseases. If they made some lifestyle changes now, like adopting a simpler diet, could that influence these killer diseases? Could it arrest, disarm, and perhaps even reverse some of these diseases? Let me share this with you. It happened during World War II. It also happened with baboons. It also happened with those GIs who survived the Saigon Hilton. And it happened to the patients of Nathan Pritikin and Dr. Dean Ornish, and to those patients of Dr. Esselstyn at the Cleveland Clinic after bypass surgeries, after stenting and recurring angina attacks. These patients did something both outrageous and courageous, and that is they broke their love affair with their rich foods. Instead, they began to focus on foods as grown, added some consistent daily exercise, and gave up their smoking. And the outcome? You'll find out. But you know, most people don't really want to make the effort of attacking the causes of our problems. We look for the quick fix. We look for the silver bullet. After all, we have been really blinded. We have been spoiled by the medical high-tech approach that has answers for everything, especially for these episodic diseases. We can fix some infectious disease in 10 days with the right medication. We can set broken bones. We can take care of emergency issues. We are the finest medical system anywhere. But when it comes to those chronic diseases, we are somewhat limited. You know, we don't just have a special drug that can kill the pathogen and that wipes out the disease. When it comes to these chronic diseases, they're largely lifestyle related. There's a confluence of affluence related health habits. Smoking, too much alcohol, too much sugar, too much fat, too much cholesterol, these kind of things, dietary factors. And this has been addressed by Tommy Thompson when he was the Secretary of the U.S. Health and Human Services, and he said, our nation's largest killer diseases are largely lifestyle related, and that is more than 70% of them. Therefore, they can be prevented and they can be delayed. And I'm suggesting they can also be reversed, as I will show you. They are not prevented by vaccines, he said. They're not cured by pills. They're not cured by procedures by and large. They are largely an extension of our health-damaging behaviors. Our use of tobacco, lack of exercise, and our rich diet. So let's take a closer look at what we usually do as people expect us in the health professions to take care of you in a heartbeat. Yeah, they have some angina pain, they're diagnosed with narrowed arteries, they want the bypass, they want the angioplasty, they want the stent, and I'm going to get fixed and I'm okay. These interventions may be life-saving in emergency situations, but they come to naught oftentimes within short periods of time unless people follow up with a total lifestyle makeover. And it has to be an extreme makeover. You cannot have a bypass and keep on smoking and abusing alcohol and not exercising and still eating the steaks and the omelets. You can't. If you want to utilize the benefits of these procedures, we need to follow up on some lifestyle changes. Here are some of the best estimates of what a bypass can do. Only about 10% of heart attack patients actually have their life extended after bypass surgery. Only in 10% of the cases. We have overlooked the idea that these bypasses close up again. You see what you do, you take a vein from a leg and you actually stitch it in as a graft into the arterial system of the coronary arteries. Now you have a bypass and the blood can flow again. You have no more angina pain and you think, no, I'm okay, I'm cured. For how long? Here's some of the disturbing results. At 6 months, 18% of these grafted vessels are narrowing down again. After 12 to 18 months, 38 to 46% of these grafted vessels have already failed again. And so what are you going to do now? Have a second bypass? there must be a better way to do it. And that is, if you need to have a bypass, it's very important that you make those changes in your lifestyle. What about medications? Well, some of these statin drugs can be helpful, especially after you had a heart attack. But in general, when it comes to these chronic diseases, we are probably relying too much on medications. And we always have to recognize that there are side effects. There's not one drug without side effects. As a matter of fact, some researchers and some policymakers are quite concerned in that 11% of all US deaths, that's 11% of all the American deaths, are related to prescription drugs, making it the number 3 cause of death. And so we need to begin to recognize that, yes, these drugs can be very helpful, but when it comes to high blood pressure, you don't really cure the high blood pressure. When it comes to diabetes, you don't really cure the diabetes type 2 with insulin or medications. And you have to always remember there are side effects. For instance, with diabetes drugs, almost all of these drugs are causing appetite enhancement, which means you eat more, you gain weight, your diabetes gets worse, you need more medication, and you're in this vicious cycle. And you cannot break out of it. But you could if you attacked the causes instead of just controlling the symptoms. So that's what we need to do. Are we treating the symptoms when it comes to these chronic diseases, or are we taking care of the causes? I mean, some of my colleagues are working day and night in trying to keep the floor dry. But maybe we ought to team up with the public health people. Maybe we have to bring some plumbers in to fix the pipes that are broken. That's where we have an opportunity of closer collaboration. The late Professor Leon Eisenberg at Harvard, even some years back, said medical intervention after the onset of chronic illness has little influence on longevity. We need to recognize that we need to do our part and do it as soon as we can, because most of these high-tech approaches in dealing with the symptoms of chronic disease come too late, and they're very costly. Here you see the change. In 1960, we spent 5% of our income on medical care as a society. In 2015, nowadays, we're spending 19% of our total income on medical care. And what really disturbs me and others is the fact that 84% of the national cost of medical care, 84% is spent on managing chronic diseases, managing symptoms without bringing about a cure. A cure comes not from high-tech approaches, but from a low-tech approach, and that has to do with education, with motivation, and with inspiration. We need a new cultural understanding, and we need to work together as a culture to make the environment more friendly towards health. Let's take a look at what happened in World War II. Here now you have the Nazi armies marching into Norway. They occupy the country, they take all the livestock away from the people, and they have to live on very simple foods. And the outcome? Yeah. In the midst of stress and anxiety and war, heart disease rates drop dramatically and very fast. Diabetes rates drop. Arthritis rates drop. Overweight rate drops. It's an amazing result. And then people said, well, there must be some other reasons for this. So they said, well, why don't we wait until after the war is over and people begin to eat like they used to eat before the war? They did. And look what happened. Heart disease rates climbed. Diabetes rates climbed. Arthritis rates climbed. All in short order. How we use our fork and knife can make a lot of difference in reversing these diseases. The same thing is true with animal experiments. Dr. Castelli pointed out over and over again when he was the director of the famous Framingham study. He said, if you want to reverse coronary artery disease in these monkeys, where you created it first by giving them a typical American diet plus some extra cholesterol and fat, if you want to reverse coronary artery disease in these monkeys, all you have to do is feed them a simple, low-fat diet of plant-based whole food. Hear ye. You can do this with animals. At random. In most species. And then people say, well, that's animals, but how do you know this is also working for humans? Well, let me give you 3 examples. Here's Nathan Pritikin. Nathan Pritikin was diagnosed at the age of 42 with coronary artery disease and also shortly thereafter with malignant lymphoma, a certain cancer. He was a searcher. He looked for answers to the disease. He looked at the global epidemiology, and he looked at societies where people did not have heart disease, they didn't have diabetes, they didn't have the obesity issue. And he began to decide to try to eat like these people, and he moved towards a plant-based whole food diet. He cut back on the sugars and the oils and the grease and the salt and so on, and he began to eat more like native populations. And here you see what happened to his cholesterol levels. Even though his physician told him at the beginning, you look, sir, what you have, you have. Cholesterol is something that you cannot change. You just picked the wrong parents. Well, I mean, that was the state of knowledge that we had at that time, 1958. We didn't know that cholesterol could be moved with the dietary means. And we didn't have any medications then to help it. But look what happened. His cholesterol in 1955 was 280. He was diagnosed with coronary artery disease. He made changes immediately. It dropped within weeks to 208, went down to 160, 100, and down to 96, and it stayed there until the rest of his life. You can change cholesterol very rapidly. Question, when you change your cholesterol, which is at the top of the risk arch, as a driving force of atherosclerosis, will you be able to reverse the disease process? Well, Pritikin was very, very successful, so much so in his own life that people came to him and learned from him, and ultimately he opened up a residential longevity center where he offered a 4-week residential intensive therapeutic lifestyle change program. Lots of education, every week biometrics, cholesterol checks, very simple diet of foods as grown, plant-based, simply prepared, plus daily exercise. And then over time, as the center was flooded with people from all over the world, as he began to hire researchers to really look more carefully into the mechanisms, ultimately 130 scientific papers were published in peer-reviewed medical journals. And aside from the 7 best-selling books, the Pritikin program was a well-established program and became the revolutionary program in America in 1975. It helped us to understand that maybe we ought to take a look at how we use fork and knife more effectively. Here you see what happened to patients on high blood pressure medications for at least 2 years. 83% of them are no longer on medication within 4 weeks when they leave the Pritikin Center, and 2 years later, 80% are still off medication. Their blood pressures have normalized, particularly in response to a diet where the salt was significantly reduced, as well as other factors. Take a look at the blood cholesterol changes. This all within 3 weeks. You can see dramatic changes. This is on some 855 patients, dropped 25%. And this is important because for every % drop in cholesterol, you drop your risk of a heart attack by twice the amount. You know what that means? 25% drop in cholesterol times 2, that's 50% drop in coronary risk within 4 weeks. And all what you have to do is use your fork and knife differently. Here you see some of the results. 51 patients came with angina pain, with chest pain, and 30 of them left angina free. This is unheard of, because when you have angina for the rest of your life, you're on medication. Not here. And here's what happened when they did a 5-year follow-up. They found that only 17 of the 51 patients with angina actually now had angina once more. But it's 17 out of 51, 33%. No medications, no bypasses, no stents. Furthermore, they had 64 coronary patients that were told to have bypass surgery. For some reason or another, they voted not to do this and instead came to the Pritikin Longevity Center. And of the 64 patients, 51 did not need surgery over the next 5 years. They no longer had angina. They were new people. Well, you say, well, that's very, very interesting, but did they really reverse the disease process? Well, here's a Nathan Pritikin. When he passed away, they did an autopsy and they found And here's a report from the New England Journal of Medicine. A total absence of developed atherosclerosis and the complete absence of its effects are found in Mr. Pritikin's arteries. And you say, well, you know, this is just one case. Maybe that's an exception to the rule. Does it really work? Do you have any randomized clinical studies? Yes, we do. Here's the work of Dr. Diehl, well-known, highly respected, with many publications in some of the best medical journals. Here's one of his first major studies that rocked the whole medical establishment. It was published in the British medical journal Lancet in 1990. What did he do? He took 48 coronary heart disease patients. And then over the next 12 months, half of these people were placed on a very low-fat vegetarian diet, and the other group was placed on a 30% fat American Heart Association diet. Now, what do you think happened? Over the next 12 months, you see the cholesterol dropped 24% in the vegetarian group, but only 5% in the usual care, the American Heart Association program. What about the plaques, the atherosclerotic buildup on the arteries? Well, they used space-age technology that allowed them to measure those very fine changes. And here's what they found. 82% of these plaques on the inside of the arteries had diminished in the group that was on the vegetarian, very low-fat diet, foods as grown, plus exercise and stress management. While in the American Heart Association diet program, 53% of the people actually had an increase in the luminal growth. They had more atherosclerotic plaque developing over that 12 months period. And so while the Heart Association diet might be helpful in some ways in slowing down the disease process, you know, if you really want to reverse the disease process, you have to go all the way. It all depends what you want to accomplish. If you really want to have reversal, you cannot play around with making a few little changes. Well, I used to have 6 eggs a week and I have only 1 egg a week. Well, that's an improvement, but you know, you got to go all the way. You've got to draw the line in the sand. This is not for Pambies. This is for people that really want it. And when they do, the results are there. Here's Ornish covered in Newsweek. I mean, he is such a well-published author in the scientific literature. It should not really surprise us that he also makes it on the front page of Newsweek. The article says, Ornish has scientifically proven that people can open their blocked arteries without drugs or surgery. Instead of splitting people's torsos to replumb their hearts, he guides them through a rigorous lifestyle program. And here's Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, a surgeon, well-known, highly respected at the Cleveland Clinic, who began to develop a new passion later in his life, and that was to see if he could reverse coronary artery disease with diet alone. Dr. Ornish had been very successful using multiple modalities, stress management, exercise, stop smoking, and so on, and diet. And he said, I want to see if I can do this with diet alone. And so he took 24 coronary artery patients. They were basically on their way out. Some say that, he actually said that they were the walking dead. They may have had 6 months or 12 months or 2 years to live. He took these patients and he said, if you are serious about working with me, I'm going to work with you. I see you every 2 weeks. I take your blood pressure every 2 weeks. I take your cholesterol every 2 weeks, and I'll guide you. He did. And he used a very plant-based, very low-fat, whole foods diet. This is a one-man show. He and his wife did this. And here's what you see after 2.5 years. You see some of the angiograms, the special x-rays of the arteries. You see on the left-hand side, there's a coronary artery here where very little blood is flowing through the artery because it's very narrowed down. And then 2.5 years later, you see the same artery, coronary artery. This time, it's perfect blood flow because the artery has opened up again, and no stents, no medication to speak of. This was strictly in response to a very simple diet of foods as grown, where he recommended absolutely no fat, and he was very, very strict on that point, to eat more foods as grown, and here you see the results. So you take a look at these 18 patients. They had been treated at the cardiology department at the famous Cleveland Clinic, and during those 8 years of being treated there, their cholesterol averaged about 237, which obviously was high, but at those days it was considered to be okay. And over those 8 years, these people also had 49 cardiovascular events. I mean, just being with the best cardiologist doesn't mean that you are not suffering from the damage done by high cholesterol numbers. So then they come to Dr. Esselstyn. He puts them on a very simple diet, foods as grown, and what you see now is in the next 5 years, not one cardiovascular event. 12 years further down the line, the cholesterol still is 145, no medication, no angina, no heart disease event, no stroke. Truly amazing results. Not one cardiovascular event in those 12 years. But what about those 6 that dropped out? Well, those that didn't drop out, no cardiovascular events. Those who dropped out, those 6, 13 cardiovascular events, which really makes the point again. The body's always trying to go back to normal. The body's always desperately trying to heal itself. But you cannot expect the body to heal itself if you take a Ferrari and you pour diesel fuel in it. You have to put the right raw materials into that body. Now let me take you to the halls of power. Let me take you to Washington, D.C. Here you meet President Bill Clinton, 2004, undergoing quadruple corner bypass in an effort to forestall a heart attack. And when 6 years later, the angina pain comes back, and he's now scheduled for a stent for further interventions, there's this cardiologist trying to probably protect him, and he says, look, and here's the quote, "This was not the result of his lifestyle or his diet. What we have to remember," the cardiologist said, "is that heart disease is a chronic condition. We don't have a cure for this condition, but we have excellent treatments." After the double stenting, the president wanted to know about the life expectancy of a stent, and he was told, well, really, essentially, a stent is just a tune-up. And the cardiologist said, we see patients who come in like this every 4 to 5 years, and so the chances are, I mean, you have a chronic disease, chances are that you probably come in again in due time. And that's when the president began to get into the literature. He read the book by Dr. Esselstyn, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. He read the book by Ornish, Reversing Heart Disease. He read the book by Dr. Campbell, a China study. And based on these well-written books, he said, I want to give it a try. And he now became a disciple of a lifestyle medicine approach. Let me show you a clip here.
How did you lose so much weight? What kind of diet are you on?
The short answer is, I went on essentially a plant-based diet. I live on beans, legumes, vegetables, fruit, and it changed my whole metabolism, and I lost 24 pounds. And I got back to basically what I weighed in high school. But I did it for a different reason. I mean, I wanted to lose a little weight, but I didn't dream this would happen. I did it because after I had this stent put in, I realized that even though it happens quite often that after you have bypasses, you lose the veins because they're thinner and weaker than arteries. The truth is that it clogged up, which means that the cholesterol was still causing buildup in my vein that was part of my bypass. And thank God I could take the stents. I don't want it to happen again. So I did all this research, and I saw that 82% of the people since 1986 who have gone on a plant-based, no dairy, no meat of any kind, no chicken, turkey. I eat very little fish. Once in a while I'll have a little fish, not often. If you can do it, 82% of the people who've done that have begun to heal themselves. Their arterial blockage cleans up, the calcium deposit around their heart breaks up. This movement has been led by a doctor named Caldwell Esselstyn at the Cleveland Clinic, Dean Ornish and Minowa in California, the doctors Campbell, father and son, who wrote the China study, and a handful of others. But we now have 25 years of evidence. And so I thought, well, since I need to lose a little weight for Chelsea's wedding, I'll become part of this experiment. I'll see if I can be one of those that can have a self-clearing mechanism. We'll see.
I hope you're healthy for many years and get to see grandchildren for many years
Me
to
too.
come.
That's really the big deal. You know, Hillary and I, we're happy. We love our son-in-law and we admire him, but and we'd like to be around. If there's grandkids, we want to be there to do our part.
Mr. President, good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks for what you're doing.
Doctors like me are used to treating people with this, a scalpel. But you may actually get better results with a simple fork. Now today I've got a show that's going to re-examine the way you eat forever. We've got the science that suggests that you can make 3 changes. And by doing that, you can avoid dying of cancer and of heart disease. It's being brought to life in a brand new documentary. I saw it. I loved it. I need all of you to see it too. Here's an exclusive look at what could be the Hail Mary of medicine.
This could be the first generation of children in the United States that lives less than its parents.
I got 2 pills I take for my diabetes, then I got 1 for cholesterol, high blood pressure, and then I take Byetta, which is an injectable.
I'm getting really shaky and I'm sick and I'm fatigued, and that's when they diagnosed me with hypertension and diabetes.
Obesity, diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure cost this country more than $120 billion each year.
People are saying, you're crazy. You're a cancer patient. You should be resting. Doctors told me this. When I had the second heart attack, the doctor said I should prepare for death.
Heart disease is an absolutely toothless paper tiger that need never ever exist.
People who were raised in Japan, the Philippines, Korea, China, never had heart disease, prostate cancer, colon cancer, breast cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis.
This is the atlas of cancer mortality in China.
Virtually, the Western diet was non-existent. They had no animal products. They had no dairy, no meat.
We learned that we could turn on and turn off cancer growth just by adjusting the level of intake of that protein.
I knew at that point what caused most diseases.
Our national authorities are simply excluding this concept in order to protect the status quo.
With the Western diet, there are going to be 500,000 people in this country this year who will have to have the front half of their body divided, their heart exposed. Some people would call that extreme.
I know of nothing else in medicine that can come close to what a plant-based diet can do.
If you go through life thinking that what happens to you from a health perspective is based on your genes, you're a helpless victim.
I reversed the diabetes. The diabetes is not coming back.
I just can't understand what it's done to change my life.
Diet is so much more important than anybody ever thought.
To me, the answer is so simple, it's criminal. And it's just people starting to take responsibility for their health and starting to eat more plant-based foods. It's that simple.
It's obvious that we need to attack the causes. Here's Dr. Esselstyn in one of his publications. He said, quotes, "Stents and bypasses have their place in emergent settings. Research, however, confirms that their elective application can neither prolong life nor protect from a heart attack. In contrast, plant-based whole food nutrition, which treats disease causation, can arrest and reverse cardiovascular illness and halt the epidemic." These plant-based whole foods then are associated with the prevention and reversibility of heart disease, of type 2 diabetes. Here you have Dr. James Anderson. He wrote some 50 to 75% of type 2 diabetics on insulin and 80 to 90% of those on pills could normalize their blood sugars and be off medication within weeks if they changed their diet towards a simple foods as grown diet. And then, of course, you have more that plant-based whole foods diet would accomplish. They would be very effective in dealing with essential hypertension, with overweight, with osteoporosis, even with kidney disease and diverticular disease and high cholesterol. They're also associated with less cancer and greater longevity. Dr. Robert Allen said it very, very well. He said, health is largely a function of how people take responsibility for their own actions. Promoting and restoring health, therefore, has to do with attacking the cause of our modern diseases, and that can only be accomplished through education and cultural transformation. So what are the recommendations then? Well, I should perhaps mention that the World Health Organization recently declared processed meat as a Group 1 human carcinogen alongside with tobacco, asbestos, and diesel fumes. And they also declared that red meat is a Group 2A, that's what they call it, or probable human carcinogen. So it behooves us to perhaps look at some changes towards a simpler diet, to moving away from a diet that is disease promotive, a diet that is now even being considered to be declared a carcinogenic diet. Here is then the new cow that I like to recommend. Maybe this is more like the optimal diet that we should aim for. We need to obviously move from the typical American affluent diet composition on the right-hand side, where we have a lot of fats and sugars and protein and not enough starch, and where we also lack some of the nutritional density that you find in this kind of diet composition. Foods as grown, foods, whole foods, plant-based. This is then associated with a healthy diet, and this is the rich diet that has its problems. So we need to move from a diet that is largely processed foods, and then also it's very high in animal products, and really highlight the importance of what I consider the green wedge here. This has to become the majority of where our calories come from. This has to be the majority nutritional source. This is where we have fruits and vegetables, whole grains, legumes, and some nuts. This is where we need to go if we want to be healthier. Now, the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, has developed its own plate this last year. And this is what they recommend. They recommend fruits and vegetables and grains and protein. And they recommend that you have dairy sort of on the side. It doesn't have to be on the plate anymore as it used to be, but they say it should be maybe an item next to the plate. But please note, there are some problems with that, big problems. When you say fruits, that could be fruit juices. When you say vegetables, that could be any kind of vegetable. That could be French fries, they're considered to be vegetables. When you say grains, that could be white flour products. So you have donuts and cakes and pies, that's all part of grains. And then you have protein, and that could be meat and eggs and cheese and everything else. So they're really not very helpful to us. And so the Harvard School of Public Health and the Harvard Medical School came up with a revised, what I think is an improved guideline, a healthy eating plate. And what they recommend is lots of vegetables, fruits as grown, simply prepared, whole grains. That's a totally different concept from any kind of grain. And healthy protein, suggesting perhaps more beans and more vegetables. And by the way, you notice here, they don't recommend milk. They say milk is not essential for being a healthy person. A healthy diet does not need to have milk. If anything, it may actually diminish the healthy value of the plate, and so they recommend water instead. So this is what we recommend in our CHIP program. We have some 75,000 graduates from our program. We recommend these are the kind of foods that we should embrace. We're looking at plenty of water to hydrate the body. We recommend daily exercise, and just try to also be a nicer, gentler person. It's a diet that would reduce the fat consumption. It reduces dramatically the cholesterol, ideally zero. It really cuts back on the sugar consumption. It reduces salt to less than 5 grams. And as you eat more foods as grown, you have plenty of fiber, and you can easily get 30, 40, 50 grams of fiber, which would really help with a lot of issues that we have in the area of health. So in closing, we want to really move towards eating lower on the food chain. For reasons of health, vitality, and longer life, for reasons of ethics and world hunger and compassion, for reasons of ecological concerns, climate change, for reasons of economy and sustainability, we want to help people to move towards a plant-based whole food diet. We think this is a responsible and an enlightened choice on a planet that is fighting for its survival. And you say, well, I cannot make that change all at once. Well, how about starting here on the left side where you might be and move towards the right-hand side? Do it gradually if that's what you need to do. Set your goals. Do what you think is in your best interest. If you have heart disease, you better move right away. If you have diabetes, you better move all the way to the right-hand side as soon as you can. If you have high blood pressure, I think the same thing here. If you're obese, you want to move towards this direction as fast as you can, because this is where you have the ideal health outcome. Perfect health comes with this kind of a slate of foods in contrast to this one here. Obviously, you're interested in wanting to know more about the optimal diet guide. You want to learn more about the details of how to move from the good life to the best life. To move from using the fork and knife no longer as a weapon of mass destruction, but as an instrument of hope, health, and healing. And we want to help you. This whole conference of PlantPure Nation is based to help you with moving towards a plant-based whole food dietary program. And you will have lecture after lecture that is going to enlarge on the very items that I may have just touched on. But here's a beginning for you with getting access to an optimal diet guide. Just click on chiphealth.com/PlantPure and we'll send it to you. Blessings on you all. It's exciting being in this conference.